customer of mine one time said, now your wife is German, right? And I said, yeah. He says, and you speak German? I said, yeah. He said, you kind of got a German thing going on, don't you? And I said, you know, I had a German Shepherd once too. I'm John Willhoit. This is my shop. My dad and I both were crazy about cars. He was not into Porsches. My dad was a Rolls Royce and Bentley guy. He saw where the business had gone and the types of restorations we were doing, and he couldn't understand it. He'd say, wow, how much time are you gonna spend on that car? And somebody's really gonna pay you for that? And he just never got that part of it. But the basic car deal, I definitely got that from my dad. Usually we have a waiting time of about a year before we can get a car in for restoration. So if you're thinking about bringing a car down next week, call. The average car, I would say, for a full restoration, you're gonna spend, from the hip estimate, without seeing any car, I'd say 200 grand plus the metal work is what a restoration costs. And the metal work can be 20 grand or 100 grand. Depends on what's wrong with the car and how bad it's been messed up or what's been done to it, if it's been wrecked or rusted. We can fix anything, no matter how much it costs. So it can cost a lot if it starts out really bad. And usually the best money spent is to buy a really good car to start with and have that car restored. My sister knew I was into Porsches, and when they moved into their house 20 years ago, she called me and said, John, the guy next door to me has a blue Porsche in his backyard. So I went right over and looked over the fence, and there was this 911. I've never seen a car that looked this bad. It's a 71 911T, was delivered new with basic appointments, nothing special, no sunroof, no electric windows, no air conditioning. It didn't even have the iconic Fuchs wheels. It just had steel wheels on it originally. I've completely redone the car. The paint is still original on the car, believe it or not, but everything else has been changed. It has a short stroke 3.2 liter engine with dual spark plugs per cylinder. It's an EFI system with a Motec ECU, so it's a 300 horsepower engine. And it's got a later 915 trans. It has Boxster brakes, all the late suspension parts, and bronze bushings and spherical bearings for the suspension. So it's a hot rod. Probably overpowers the suspension of the car, but that's what makes it fun. I've had the blue car for 20 years, and it had been parked outside of the garage. The pitch of the roof had been draining water for apparently a long time right on top of the car. So I went over and I knocked on the door and I asked the guy, hey, interesting car you have in the backyard, maybe you want to sell it? And he said, you know, I bought the car new and it's got an engine problem. I said, well, yeah, I figured there was something going on with it. So I went into the backyard and opened the door of the car, and it had water up to the bottom of the door inside of the car. It was like a pressure cooker in there. When the sun came out, it had stuff growing on the roof, and we had to take down a fence in his yard to get the car out, and I agreed that I'd pay to have a fence built back up afterwards, and the wheels wouldn't roll, so we had to spray WD-40 on the flatbed so that we could drag the car up onto the flatbed. And 20 years later, I finally got it running. You know, Porsche was always kind of up here. I mean, it was beyond what I imagined that I could afford anyway. I grew up playing golf, and at the golf course where my parents were members, there was a guy that was the manager, and he had a 57 coupe. And I'd always see him, I mean, I had seen him for years before I could even driving this car to work and parking it in the parking lot. And one day he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I'd really like to drive your Alfa." And I had this 59 Veloce Spider, and it was not that great, but it was an Alfa, and he thought it would be cool to drive it. So I said, "Yeah, well, I'll let you drive my Alfa if you let me drive your Porsche." And he said, "Oh, sure, I'll that's a good trade." And so I took him out and I let him drive my Alfa, and of course I rode with him, and he just was sliding it around corners and everything, and brought it back, and I was thinking, man, this is gonna be so much fun. I'm gonna get to drive this Porsche. So he parked the car and got out, and I said, "Okay, let me have your keys." And he goes, "Are you nuts? I'm not gonna let you drive my car." And I said, "Well, so at least give me a ride in it." So he gave me a ride in the car, and we got in that car, and the first thing I noticed was there's no tunnel, and there was a lot of room in the car. And I remember the feeling of the engine in the back and everything. And we went for a drive for probably 5 minutes. And I remember thinking right at that point, I'm gonna get one of these cars. That's just, I have to get one of these cars.